So this is the third and what will be the final in a three-part series looking at the roots and the background of some of the Christmas celebrations and the events that we are remembering for Christmas. And in this one, we're going to look at some of the more secular aspects. We're going to start though looking at the what scholars and those who have kind of investigated it, the year and the date for Jesus Christ's birth about 2,000 years ago. And of course, there is dispute over the year and the date as well. How we came up with December 25th, how, the calendar, obviously the year of 2023 is based on a long ago assumption of when Jesus was born and so forth. And at this point, it's almost universally accepted that he wasn't born on 1 AD or 1 BC, whichever it would be in order to base the calendar on. But we're going to look more closely in terms of what the best guess is in terms of what year he was born. And then the roots of the December 25th date, that how they came up with that, and some of the alternative theories relative to what day of the year it actually was. And then we're going to look at the roots of where the legend of Santa Claus came from, looking back at the actual Saint Nicholas, which is where that got started before it, of course, evolved as far as it has to the jolly old elf Santa Claus that we know. The origins of the Christmas tree. And then finally, the last thing we're going to look at is the candy cane, which has some pretty interesting and very deep meaning relative to the symbolism associated with it. So let me just pause for a second as I bring up the slide. So again, we're going to look at the year Jesus was born, or at least the speculations of it, why December 25th was picked, looking at St. Nicholas and becoming Santa Claus, the Christmas tree, and the candy cane. So just briefly. So there was for really many years, and in some circles still is, this long-standing belief that Herod the Great died in 4 BC, or what most scholars say is BCE now. Why is that important? That's important because we know from the accounts in the scripture that Herod was the king when Jesus was born. That in fact he was the king for at least some period of time, a year, maybe 2 years after Jesus was born, because again we know that's the time frame within which the wise men came to visit. And obviously also that shortly after that King Herod had the babies and up to 2 years old, slaughtered in Bethlehem, trying to rid himself of a possible rival king. So we know that when Herod died, we have to backdate a little bit in terms of when Jesus was born. So if he died in 4 BCE, that means that Jesus would have been born in 5 or 6 BCE. However, some more recent scholarship has indicated that King Herod actually died in 1 BCE, which means that the year of Jesus's birth was more likely to be 2 or 3. Again, a little bit before the death of Herod, in order to leave room, for those other events that occurred when Herod was still alive, and yet those events had to take place at least some period of time, a year, maybe 2 years, after Jesus was actually born. So let me just share with you a video that kind of goes through some of the background information that leads us to believe that 2, maybe 3 BC makes a lot more sense relative to when Jesus was actually born.
Let's talk about one other thing that you might find interesting. The birth of Christ. Well, what about Christmas, December 25th? It turns out the first recorded mention of December 25th is the calendar of Philocalus, which was 354 AD. It assumed the birth of Jesus to be on Friday, December 25th of 1 AD. That was their presumption when they made the calendar. December 25th was officially proclaimed by the church fathers in 440 AD. Understand, you got 4 centuries have gone by before they're even acknowledging. Nowhere in the Bible that I can think of do they acknowledge birthdays. The only birthday that comes to mind, in my mind, is the birthday of Antiochus Epiphanes, because he chose his birthday to desecrate the Holy of Holies. That was 25th of Kislev on the Jewish calendar, and you know that whole story. But anyway, birthdays, we have a tendency in our thing to celebrate birthdays. You see, this date that they picked was the vestige of the Roman holiday of Saturnalia. It's a carryover from the pagan Rome. The culture was used to celebrating on that thing, so they adapted that tradition to their own, not the politically correct Christianity which had been ushered in by then. The year of Christ's birth is the first issue. The year is broadly accepted as 4 BC because of an erroneous conclusion from Josephus's recording of an eclipse that was assumed to be on March 13th of 4 BC, shortly before Herod died. It turns out that was probably an error. There's several problems with this. In addition, that more likely the eclipse occurred on December 29th, 1 BC, but that's really not very helpful. Considerable time elapsed between Jesus' birth and Herod's death, since the family fled to Egypt to escape Herod's verdict. They didn't return until after Herod's death. So clearly there's an interval between Christ's birth and Herod's death of some kind. Okay, where was he? Down in Egypt. While he was in Egypt, he visited Tanakerkos Island. That's a whole other thing we can get into sometime. Herod died, we know, on January 14th of 1 BC. So Jesus was born substantially before then, is the point. Okay? Now, let's take a look at the church fathers. Tertullian, who was born about 160 AD, stated that Augustus began to rule 41 years before the birth of Jesus and died 15 years after that event. And that's in his writings. Augustus died on August 19th of 14 AD, placing Jesus' birth at about 2 BC, if he's right. Remember, there's no year 0 as you play with these numbers. In other words, 1 BC comes, the next year is 180, right? There's no year 0 is the point. Tertullian also notes that Jesus was born 28 years after the death of Cleopatra in 30 BC. That's also consistent with the 2 BC date. Irenaeus, born about a century after Jesus, also notes the Lord was born in the 41st year of the reign of Augustus. And so since Augustus began his reign in the autumn of 43 BC, this also is consistent with a 2 BC estimate here. Eusebius, who's known as the father of church history, ascribes it to the 42nd year of the reign of Augustus and the 28th from the subjection of Egypt on the death of Antony and Cleopatra. And so the 42nd year of Augustus ran from the autumn of 2 BC to the autumn of 1 BC. Subjugation of Egypt and the Roman Empire occurred in the autumn of 30 BC. So that 28th year then extended from the autumn of 3 BC to the autumn of 2 BC. The only date that will meet all these constraints then would be in the autumn, apparently, of 2 BC. The one thing we know that Jesus was not born in December for 2 reasons. The flocks were at open field. They're not in open field until after October. And no Roman administrator in his right mind would have everybody register in their hometowns in a season when most of Judea is not passable. Jesus even says, pray that your flight be not on Sabbath day and so forth. So most scholars recognize that it ain't December.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Well, first of all, when I actually taught this class live, somebody asked the question, what's the difference between the term BCE and BC? And there really isn't, other than the fact that, again, we pretty much know that Jesus was not born in 1 AD. Therefore, if you're going to assign terms to the years, BC being before Christ, if he was actually born in, say, somewhere between 2 and 6 BC, how can you label a year before Christ, when it wasn't before Christ? So So scholars today, generally speaking, are using the term BCE, which is before the Common Era. Now, of course, the Common Era was based on a calendar that was supposed to be based on the year of the birth of Christ. But again, since again, we're understanding that the birth of Christ was actually before what was originally anticipated, they're changing the terminology to say, instead of before Christ, before the Common Era. And the Common Era is when almost everybody around the world accepts that this is what year one was. So anyway, as Chuck Missler, and that's who that speaker was, indicated, most scholars today reject December 25th as being the actual day of the calendar of Jesus's birth. This date was first noted in about 2 centuries after the birth of Christ. It was reiterated by Chrysostom in 386, and again was accepted by the early church fathers, although centuries, after the event, as to be December 25th. Now, one of the things that Chuck Missler said was this was because, at least in part, there was a pagan festival called Saturnalia, and so the Christians just kind of co-opted that date. That may be true to a degree, but it actually goes much deeper than that. And there are those who accepted the date of December 25th because it coincided with being 9 months to the day after the date of what was anticipated to be his, or perceived to be the date of his crucifixion 30 some years later, which was March 25th. And what they were saying is the belief was that he was conceived on the same date of the calendar as he was crucified on 30 some years later. And so if he was crucified on March 25th, and conceived on that same date of the calendar, then 9 months later would be December 25th. So that is one of the reasons why many of the or at least some of the early church fathers accepted a December 25th date. And again, it wouldn't be beyond God to do something like that. I have said many times, my students have heard me say, there are no coincidences in God's vernacular. And so it would not surprise me whatsoever that on the same date he would have 2 significant events in the life of Christ. Now, many of you may know that the Eastern Orthodox Church actually celebrates Christmas on January 6th. And of course, they celebrate that as the date on the calendar that Jesus was born. They also celebrate January 6th as the day that the wise men, the Magi, visited Jesus 2 years after his birth. They also say that this was the day of Jesus's baptism by John the Baptist, that all these events on January 6th on the calendar. And they also use this date as being 9 months after his crucifixion date, 30 some years later. So they say that he was crucified on April 6th, so many years, of course, 30 some years after his birth, and that he was conceived on April 6th as well, and then therefore was born the following January 6th. And that's how they came up with that date of January 6th. It is interesting that despite the skeptical resistance to a winter date, which we just heard Chuck Missler give voice to, it is the deepest and longest standing tradition, whether you accept it as December 25th or January 6th. Either one, those are the most ancient accepted dates that we know of, and they are both in the winter. And as far as this notion that the fact that it is described that there are shepherds in the field with their flock, that precludes a winter date, it doesn't. The fact is that the Mishnah, Jewish writings, of the time specify that the sheep in and around Bethlehem specifically were to be outside all year. And what's really interesting is that those particular sheep, that particular flock at Bethlehem, was the flock of sheep that was used in the temple for sacrifice. So it's interesting in two different things. Number one, it specifies that those particular sheep were to be out in the field. Number two, that the sheep in Bethlehem were the sacrificial lambs, basically. And so, again, with God, there are no coincidences. And if you saw the last lesson or attended, you know that when we look at the shepherds that were overseeing the flock in Bethlehem were actually priest shepherds, and that those shepherds that the angels visited and said, come, to the city of David, which was Bethlehem, go into the town and go see this Savior that has been born, who of course we know would become the Lamb of God, the ultimate sacrificial sheep. As I looked into this, there are others that have proposed a date in March, which coincides with his crucifixion. So in other words, he wasn't conceived on that same date of the calendar. He was actually born on that same date of the calendar, which would place it probably in March. And that's also when new lambs are born. So again, kind of this coinciding with Jesus's earthly mission. So at the time of year when the new sacrificial lambs are born, so was the Lamb of God. That's what they proposed. And then finally, there are others that propose an autumn date, most likely September, to coincide with the Jewish festivals, Rosh Hashanah, which is New Year, and Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. So let me just share another video. And this is one specifically dealing with the date, December 25th.
How did December 25th become Christmas? It's a difficult story to tell because we only have fragmentary evidence. Let me simply address a couple of aspects of the puzzle in this video. First, the early Christians had no consensus on the date of Jesus' birth. Clement of Alexandria, writing in the 200s, offers lots of different opinions that were circulating in his day. It seems no one believed at that time that Jesus' birth occurred on December 25th, though. There was no clear apostolic tradition that was passed down on the matter. In fact, we know that before December 25th became the accepted feast of Jesus' birth, believers in the Holy Land were originally celebrating Jesus' nativity on January 6th. Why were there so many different opinions about the date of Jesus' birth? Well, for one thing, the New Testament provides no evidence for the date of Jesus' birth. Luke, of course, has shepherds in the field on the night of Jesus' birth, and so because of this, some people have claimed that Jesus' nativity couldn't have occurred during the winter months because shepherds wouldn't be in the field. It's often pointed out that Jewish sources indicate that sheep were to have been grazing in the fields from April to November. But the problem with that is an earlier source than these that are often cited, like the Babylonian Talmud. The Mishnah, which dates to about the 2nd century, tells us that sheep would have been grazing in the field in February, which is one of the coldest months of the year. We also can't rule out the possibility of an unusually warm winter or unusually warm winter night. So all things being equal, the fact that the shepherds are in the field, it does make a winter date less likely, but we probably shouldn't hang too much on that one detail. Others have tried to calculate Jesus' birth by following the timing of Luke's narrative. John the Baptist is born 6 months before Jesus, and so some have tried to figure out the time of year when John the Baptist was born. They look at when the angel Gabriel appeared to the angel Gabriel appeared to Zechariah. There's problems here, though, as well. Luke doesn't tell us when John's birth happened. Some have argued that his father, Zechariah, is portrayed as encountering Gabriel in the temple during the Day of Atonement, which occurred in September. In this view, Zechariah is the high priest. If John is born 9 months later, that would put Jesus' birth in December. John's birth would be in June, Jesus in December. That matches up with the liturgical calendar of the church. Others have argued that we can try to figure out the time of year Zechariah was in the temple and then the birth of John and Jesus, based on the fact that Luke tells us that he was serving as part of the priestly line of Abijah. So they try to figure out what time of year would that have been. The problem, however, is that in the rush to correlate Jesus' birth to Christmas in Luke's narrative, people overlook some pretty big problems. In fact, Zechariah is not portrayed as the high priest. He's in the temple because it fell to him by lot to carry out part of the daily Tamid ritual. He's not there for the Day of Atonement. Likewise, attempts to place the timing of Zechariah's appearance in the temple based on his priestly line. What time was Abijah, the line of Abijah, serving in the temple? That also falls flat. Among other things, ancient Jews didn't have our regular practice of leap years. So in order to keep the calendar working right, they would have to at various times introduce an extra month, right? We don't know when they did this. We don't know how they did this, how often they did this. And so we can't really figure out when all the priestly divisions would have been serving. We don't really know the order, the rotation, how it would have affected all of that. So in some, we really can't determine when Zechariah was serving in the temple just based on Luke's narrative. So how did we get to December 25th? Some claim it was due to the fact that Romans worshipped a sun god on December 25th. There's a whole story about that, but the evidence for that story is not as clear as people think it is. In fact, part of the reason Christians came to choose December 25th seems to be that on the old Roman calendar, it was the date of the winter solstice, the day the sunlight begins to grow. But I'll have to talk about all of that in a future video because we've got so much more to say. If you'd like to learn more about this issue, you can pick up my book, The True Meaning of Christmas, The Birth of Jesus and the Origins of the Season. Very grateful to John Cavadini, noted theologian and scholar, for writing the foreword to the book. It's also available in Spanish. Please consider sharing this video with others. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Merry Christmas.
So again, I think the bottom line is that if God had wanted us to know the date of Jesus's birth, he would have told us. You know, one of the gospel writers or somewhere he would have made it known. He did make it known when Jesus would come to Jerusalem riding on a donkey, basically proclaiming himself to be king, because he gave that information to Daniel several centuries before it actually happened. And there's some terrific work done by Sir Robert Anderson, who wrote a book, The Coming Prince, who took that prophecy of Daniel and actually calculated the number of days, you know, going from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, and came up with the very day. And in fact, we know from the scripture that Jesus, just before he enters Jerusalem for the last time, looks out over the city and laments that they did not know the day of their visitation, when they could have been checking days off the calendar and known the exact day that their king, their Messiah, would be coming. Next, I want to turn to the legend of Santa Claus, and its roots actually have it has historical roots. There really was a Saint Nicholas. Obviously, there's been quite an evolution of that original Saint Nicholas to the person that we celebrate, that we recognize, or that our kids sit on the laps of this jolly old elf in the red suit called Santa Claus. So he's a very distant cousin from the original Saint Nick, but it is interesting to take a look at the history and from where that legend began. And so let's take a look.
Of all the figures from Christianity to mythologically metamorphose into Christmas-time gift-bringer Santa Claus, why was it St. Nicholas? While we're at it, why did any figure from early Christian history end up becoming our favorite sleigh-riding home intruder? As we celebrate the year-end holiday of Saturnalia, Yule! No, come on, which one is it? Christmas! That one! They all just blend together. I thought it would be illuminating to trace the history of how a 4th century Christian bishop became the international face of holiday cheer. It's a millennium and a half between Saint and Claus, and the way we got there covers 3 continents and multiple religions. But very little of that intersects with the stated purpose of this show being about historians. See, St. Nicholas himself was a man of action rather than words. Meanwhile, Santa Claus isn't exactly known for his poetry, and if I want to keep this show PG, I'm not sure I'll take my chances even quoting the man. So, on paper, neither figure qualifies as this show's namesake history maker. But here's a secret for you. I don't care. So, let's do some Christmas. Our story begins at a tumultuous time for the Roman Empire, which, admittedly, does not narrow it down, but in this case, Nick was born in the 200s AD amid a century of invasions, internal upheavals, economic disaster, and widespread disease. As a result, we have no records until the 500s, around when Emperor Justinian was renovating churches to St. Nicholas in Constantinople. We do get the sense that Nick Boy here was already established in Christian tradition and widely regarded as a cool dude worth venerating. But what did he do? Well, according to our first proper source, a 9th century Byzantine saint biographer, Nick was born in southern Anatolia around 270 and grew up devoutly Christian when the new religion had dubious legality in the empire. His parents had been rather wealthy, which was a rare accomplishment during the crisis of the 3rd century, and when they died, a much more common accomplishment at the time, Nicholas vowed to spend his considerable inheritance on those in need, and this combo of big heart and deep pockets set him up well for a life of service. His most famous story involves a poor father and his 3 daughters. The father barely had the money to feed his family, let alone pay for 3 dowries so that his daughters could find good husbands. So he thought his only option was to sell his daughters into prostitution. Dark. Nicholas had money to pay their dowries but didn't want to make a big show of his generosity, so he instead snuck over to the house at night, tossed a giant sack of gold through the window, and ran away. The father and his daughters were overjoyed by their good fortune and married the eldest daughter to a nice husband, giving thanks to the anonymous benefactor who saved her. Nick repeated this reverse break-in 2 more times until all 3 women were happily married and distinctly not enslaved. But on the 3rd night, the father stayed up and caught Nicholas in the act, thanking him profusely for all his kindness. This story is the most Santa-y of the bunch, as it establishes the core trait of stealth charity, but there's plenty other cool saintly jazz in the life of Nick. Like the multiple times he's said to have saved crews full of sailors by calming storms with a prayer, or the time Nicholas successfully prayed for God to revive 3 boys dismembered by an evil innkeeper. But as far as historical specifics, he's said to have been made Bishop of Myra, then imprisoned and tortured by the Emperor Diocletian during his Christian persecutions, then later freed by Emperor Constantine after legalizing Christianity. Some, but not all, sources indicate he was present at Constantine's Council of Nicaea, where he allegedly asserted the theological importance of the Trinity by punching a heretic in the face. Tragically, that story first appeared in the 1300s, so it's a great meme, but it is only that. There's plenty else to recount from the realms of fable and Christian tradition, but we're already stretching the bounds of historicity, so we'll leave Nicholas there and begin exploring his robust afterlife. Over the following centuries, he was revered in the Byzantine East, and given his patronage of sailors, many of his churches were built in port cities. Things changed in the 1070s and 80s when most of Anatolia got conquered by Muslim invaders, so Italian sailors from Bari took it upon themselves to bring his bones to safer ground. Namely, they housed the relics of St. Nicholas in a lovely new basilica and raked in the cash from becoming a major pilgrimage site. As tales of St. Nicholas took on new popularity in the Latin West, this figure came in contact with Northern Europe and the vestiges of Norse paganism, whereupon they began to syncretize. Christmas in general had a history of borrowing from Roman Saturnalia and the Germanic Yule, and this confluence of medieval traditions included the Wild Hunt, a parade of ghosts led by Odin riding a horse through the night sky, a core element of the winter celebrations into which St. Nicholas was smushed. In the Low Countries, aka the Netherlands and friends, this fusion of Nick and Odin resulted in the character of Sint Nicolaas, or Sinterklaas, a bearded man dolled up in red bishop's garb, riding a white horse and putting money and gifts into the shoes of children and the poor, which is how we'll get to gifts and children's stockings. The Sinterklaas festival, true to Saturnalia, involved role reversals and immense public drunkenness. Good times had by all. Sinterklaas feast came to a crashing halt during the Protestant Reformation because Martin Luther wanted to abolish the cult of the saints and suggested holiday gift-giving should instead be handled by baby Jesus. Does that make Luther a killjoy? Debatable. But he made Jesus come to work on his birthday, and that also means he supports child labor. Tisk, Martin, tisk. Yes, he's an eternity old and also God, but the man was just born. Give him a minute. But unfortunately for the Protestant authorities in the Netherlands, their blanket ban on public Catholic festivals didn't stop the wintertime gift giving, as Sinterklaas went undercover, trading his ornate bishop's finery for simple red robes and continuing his festive work for the next few centuries. Sinterklaas feast was reintroduced in the mid-1800s with the appalling addition of jolly helpers and very unjolly blackface. This version retains some Saint Nick vibes by arriving to the Netherlands by boat, in this case from Spain, but again, why? Independent of the Sinterklaas tradition, other Christmas-time gift-bringers took shape around the world in the past few centuries, mostly iterating on the concept of Father Christmas, but Big Man Claus was codified in the good old US of A. Dutch colonists imported Sinterklaas to the New York area, and by the 1770s, that was anglicized into Santa Claus. In 1809, Santa was described as a portly Dutchman who rides a wagon through the sky and airdrops gifts down chimneys, and the character was locked in with 1823's A Visit from Saint Nick, better known as The Night Before Christmas. Later that century, American cartoonist Thomas Nast solidified Santa's aesthetic and established his North Pole backstory. Nast crafted his version of Santa in the midst of the Civil War and used Mr. Claus to promote a fiercely pro-Union message, giving the Union boys and their families back home a Christmas mythology to rally around. Now, after all these centuries and absolutely wild permutations of the character, we should ask, is this the spirit of Saint Nick? And honestly, kinda yeah. So remember to celebrate the true spirit of the season by throwing gold through your neighbor's windows and punching non-Trinitarian heretics. Man, Christmas is weird. Thank you for watching. This video.
So it's interesting, obviously, to watch the evolution of where things got started relative to Saint Nick, and you can see the vestiges, obviously, the gift giving and the benevolence and all that kind of stuff. And it obviously is interesting to see how it worked its way through Europe and got its way to America, and then obviously the legend kind of grew and evolved into the Santa Claus that we celebrate now in this particular culture. But again, it did have its roots. It has Christian roots, which is again something that unfortunately is often lost. So let's look at the Christmas tree. And again, this has very deep roots, primarily out of Europe as well. And let's take a look at the roots, if you will, no pun intended, of what we probably all of us have in our homes, and that's a Christmas tree.
For many around the world, it's difficult to imagine Christmas without the iconic Christmas tree, trimmed with beautiful decorations and colored lights. Children feel the excitement welling up inside them at the sight of it, and parents recall memories of their own childhood days beneath its boughs. The custom has proved so endearing that it's been taken up all around the world, with large Christmas trees not an infrequent sight in public spaces around the holiday period, in large cities in Japan and even China. Yet despite its now worldwide fame, its roots are planted firmly in more local soil. Let's discover the origin of this special tree that has so captured the hearts of people around the world. Hi friends, I'm Kevin McLean. My voice is a little rougher than usual because of a cold. But don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe, and consider supporting the channel through Patreon or PayPal. It's very much appreciated. It's hard to say exactly when the evergreen tree, either pine or fir, was first used in celebrations around the period of the winter solstice. Some trace it back to the Roman Saturnalia, saying that evergreen branches decorated Roman homes during the holiday. Websites and popular magazines repeat this, though sometimes changing the ethnic group, saying that Druids in Britain and Northern Europe used to decorate homes and temples with pine, spruce, and fir, and of course mistletoe. There are some later customs of various European peoples that may give credence to such a view, but I have never found in ancient or medieval sources directly attesting to this practice, nor have I seen anyone give a citation for this claim. So while we should not discount the possibility that this did happen, the claim is very likely based on assumptions rather than fact. The earliest claimed association between the fir tree and the Christian religion is said to have come from an account of Saint Boniface, an English monk who led a mission into the Germanic pagan regions of the Frankish Empire in the early 700s. He became famous, or more correctly, infamous, for the great crime of destroying the sacred oak of Donar, the old High German rendering of Thunras, cognate with Norse Thor. It's been repeated on some websites and in books that after Boniface felled the tree, he pointed to a young fir growing amidst the roots and said, "This tree is the symbol of the true God because its leaves never fall," and he related its triangular shape to the Trinity. This does not appear in the medieval account of the saint, however, or in any other known medieval source. The origin of this claim lies with Mary Lewis Harvey, who wrote in 1912 a piece called How St. Boniface Kept Christmas. It's a fictional account of the saint's doings, where she has him confronting Druids, despite being among the Germanic peoples. She directly copies the account of the Druid ritual from Pliny the Elder, while adding an incantation they supposedly gave to Thor. He cuts down the tree, praises the fir as a symbol of the new religion of the Christ child, and converts all the Druids, lighting the first candles on a Christmas tree. In short, it's Christian fan fiction. Well before 1913, the Christmas tree had already become a normal part of the Christmas celebrations in English and German-speaking regions, and the author just simply backdates this and presents it as if it had been some eternal part of the Christmas celebration. It's amazing how one fictional version of St. Boniface led to such a widely repeated notion. What is true is that these types of evergreen trees, fir or pine, held a special meaning in ancient Roman and Greek religion. One can find it associated with Mercury in his role as the guide of the dead, with the Thracian god Sabazios, who holds the pine cone, and the Egyptian Osiris, who had a ritual where a pine log was hollowed out and his effigy was placed within. All of these associations are linked to the cycle of life and death, and hint perhaps at rebirth. Mercury guides souls into the underworld, but also out of it. A myth of Dionysus said he was torn to pieces by the Titans, but later reborn. He is strongly connected to the life cycle of plants, especially vigorous growing grapes that must be continually pruned in order to produce fruit. Sabazios and Osiris are likewise linked to the cycle of life, and their power is connected to the annual growth and hibernation of plants. Yet the pine or fir and its cone are symbols of the ever-present life, for it does not lose its leaves, and when fires come and burn down the trees, the seeds of the pine cones spread and grow. These trees, symbolized by their cones, came to represent an idea of cyclical immortality. The pine or fir was also connected to the goddess Cybele and Attis, a Phrygian god of vegetation. The Roman poet Ovid said, "Pines high-girdled in a leafy crest, the favorite of the gods, great mother, since in this tree Attis of Cybele doffed his human shape and stiffened in its trunk." Poseidon's holy tree was also a pine. Its resin was used for waterproofing, and its wood for shipbuilding. While trees were venerated by pagans across Europe, and practices involving the burning of a Yule log are very widespread among different ethnic groups in Europe, the specific practice of the Christmas tree appears to be much more localized. It is said the earliest reference to a Christmas tree is found in the regiment of the Cistercian Order of 15th century Portugal. It says, "Note on how to put the Christmas branch. On the Christmas Eve you will look for a large branch of green laurel, and you shall reap many red oranges, and place them on the branches that come of the laurel, specifically as you have seen, And in every orange you shall put a candle, and hang the branch by a rope in the pole, which shall be by the candle of the high altar. While there are similarities here to the Christmas tradition, note that it is a branch of the laurel tree suspended from a rope. If plants were used in the Saturnalia, it may have also been the laurel. Yet one must admit that this laurel cutting practice is a far cry from what we know as a Christmas tree. The earliest dated image of a Christmas tree is claimed to be found on a private cornerstone of a home in Turckheim, now part of France, dated to 1576. You would think it would be the kind of thing that Turckheim would be pointing out as a tourist attraction or something, but there doesn't seem to be much about it anywhere on the net, and not a single picture could I find. But it's likely true. This was originally a German town, and the people most strongly connected with spreading the Christmas tree tradition were Germans. But even though Turckheim holds the oldest representation of a Christmas tree, the earliest recorded mention of a real Christmas tree comes from an account of the practices of the Brotherhood of the Blackheads. Their origin is rooted in a group of foreign merchants in Tallinn, Estonia, who protected the church and Christians when the local pagan population rebelled and tried to drive out the Christian German occupiers between 1343 and 1345. Those foreigners in Estonia were mostly Germans and Danes who had come as part of the Livonian Crusade, led by the Holy Roman Empire and the Kingdom of Denmark. And Estonia had remained largely under Danish occupation ever since. The rebellion was going well until the Teutonic Order arrived and crushed it with brutality. The Brotherhood was a military brotherhood that organized for the defense of the German occupation, and they were said to have set up a Christmas tree in their guild hall as early as 1441, and they would bring it to the town hall square at Christmas and dance around it. The black Egyptian Saint Maurice was their patron saint, possibly why they were called the Blackheads, though they may have chosen the saint based on the name. Either way, it's a bit odd. What is also odd is that we would find the earliest Christmas tree account associated with this Christian military brotherhood. Now, if the Christmas tree, as we know it, began with the early pagan practices of the Estonians and Latvians, as many proud Estonians and Latvians claim, we would expect the last people to adopt it to be the Blackheads, who murdered local pagans in the name of Christ. As the Blackheads were made up primarily of people of German backgrounds who were occupying Estonian lands, it's possible that they brought the custom there rather than adopting a local pagan one. But possibly it was a custom common to both regions. The guild was not only active in Tallinn, but also throughout Germany. In Bremen in 1570, it's recorded in guild records that a tree was set up in the guild hall and decorated with treats that would be enjoyed by the children of the guild members on Christmas Day. By 1777, German immigrants to the United States were recorded as placing Christmas trees in Connecticut. And in 1781, General Frederick Adolph Redesel set up a fir tree in Sorel, Quebec, decorated with candles and fruit. Queen Charlotte is said to have set up the first known Christmas tree in England in 1800. Queen Victoria wrote of the custom in 1832, saying, "After dinner, then we went into the drawing room near the dining room. There were 2 large round tables on which were placed 2 trees hung with lights and sugar ornaments, all the presents being placed round the trees." What all of these accounts of first known Christmas trees have in common is that from our earliest in 1441 to its earliest representation in Turckheim to its adoption into Britain and the New World is that all of these representations come from German sources. It strongly suggests that the tradition is native to German people, and it likely existed long before it's first recorded. that militant Christian orders were participating in it as early as the 15th century means it didn't possess a pagan connotation for them at the time, because they'd grown up around it so that it was just part of the culture and had probably become attached to some type of Christian explanation. Though very likely the custom of the Christmas tree does go back to a pagan practice around the winter solstice, with the tree representing the force of life and light during the darkest times of winter. However, as with many folk customs, there isn't the documentation to prove this. Dancing around the tree is recorded in many of the early accounts, however, and this speaks of an original pagan custom, most of which involve dancing. We can compare it to the May Day festival, with the dancing around the maypole. Its symbolism was not, as is sometimes suggested, the world tree. The world tree in Indo-European myth is generally the oak tree. The only known exception to this is the Norse traditions, in which it's an ash. The evergreen tree in relation to Christmas carries the same meaning as the ancient Greek and Roman use of the pine cone, relating to light and the hope of the coming spring, rebirth, renewal, regeneration. These qualities are all mentioned in the 1824 version of O Tannenbaum. And though my voice doesn't allow me to sing right now, I will read out some of the lyrics to you that detail this association. O Tannenbaum, with what delight I see you. When winter days are dark and drear, you bring us hope for all the year. O Tannenbaum, with what delight I see you. O Tannenbaum, you bear a joyful message, that faith and hope shall ever bloom, to bring us light in winter's gloom. I'd like to thank you all for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, stand tall.
And so even though the Christmas tree does apparently have pagan roots, having been brought over to the United States really a couple hundred years ago, there is very strong Christian symbolism there, certainly for us, in the form of the pine cone representing rebirth, and the evergreen tree representing perpetual life or everlasting life. And so it's reasonable for us to have Christmas trees as Christians, with the understanding of what the underlying Christian symbolism is. So finally, I want to turn to the candy cane, which again, the background of the origins of the candy cane, I think, are very, very interesting. And as with some of these other things that we've looked at, which seem secular, actually has a very deep Christian meaning. And the candy cane is certainly an example of that. So let me share with you this one last video.
Welcome to Story Adventures with Mrs. T. Today's story is a legend about a shopkeeper and a little girl who spread the good news of Jesus by sharing a simple candy cane. The Legend of the Candy Cane by Lori Wahlberg, illustrated by Richard Cowdrey, published by Zonderkids. One rainy night, a man rode his horse up to the door of an empty store. He stopped his horse and smiled. "This'll do just fine," he said. The man worked hard to fix up the old store. Pam, pam, pam went his hammer. Snish, snish, snish went his saw. The people in town did not know who the man was. Nobody knew what he was building. The grown-ups just watched and waited. The children just wondered and wished. One day, a little girl named Lucy knocked on the door of the mysterious store. "Hello," she said. "My name is Lucy. Do you need some help?" "Can you unpack boxes?" the man asked. "Yes, I can do that," answered Lucy. She came in and saw dozens of boxes and barrels and crates. Lucy opened the first box. She picked up something wrapped in paper. It was round and heavy. She almost dropped it. When she unwrapped the paper, she saw a glass jar. Lucy unpacked another glass jar, then another, and another. Fat jars, tall jars, thin jars, round jars. "Now what shall we put inside the jars?" the man finally asked. Lucy wished a secret wish. She did not tell what it was. She waited to see what the man would say. Then he took the top off a big box. Inside it, Lucy saw lollipops, chewing gum balls, peppermint sticks, taffy, and her favorite candy, gumdrops. Lucy's secret wish had come true. The man laughed when he saw Lucy's eyes light up. "Welcome to John Sonneman's candy store," he said. "And now, Miss Lucy, we must fill all these jars with treats." So they worked and worked until all the jars were full of colorful candy. In the very last crate, Lucy saw a candy she had never seen before. "What is this, Mr. Sonneman?" Lucy asked. "This is a very special Christmas candy," he explained. He picked up the red and white candy. "It is called a candy cane. Do you know what letter this candy cane looks like?" he asked. Lucy took the candy cane and looked at it. "J," she said. "Yes," Mr. Sonneman smiled. "J is for Jesus, who was born on Christmas Day." "Now, turn the candy this way," he said, and he turned the J upside down. "What does it remind you of now?" Lucy looked at it and thought. Then she said, "I know. It's like a shepherd's staff." "That's right," said the candy man. "The shepherds in the field were the first people to find out that Jesus had been born." "Why does the candy cane have red and white stripes?" Lucy asked. Mr. Sonneman looked sad. "When Jesus grew to be a man, some Roman soldiers arrested him. They beat him so hard that his blood ran down like red stripes. But Jesus asked God to forgive those soldiers. He forgives all people when they ask him. So the red stripes remind us that Jesus gave us the great gift of forgiveness when he died on the cross. The white stripes remind us that Jesus rose from the dead and our hearts are washed clean from sin when we give our lives to him." It was December and it was cold outside, but every morning Lucy and Mr. Sonneman went to houses and farms near their town. They told the candy cane story and left each family a gift and an invitation to come to the grand opening of Sonneman's candy store on Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve, everybody came to the new candy store. They were happy and excited because they shared gifts and candy together. But they were especially happy because they shared something more, something bigger, something better. On that night, the people shared the story of the candy cane. They shared the miracle of Christ's birth and the mercy of God's love. They remembered what he had done to wash our sins away, and they thanked Jesus for the greatest gift of all. The end. Thanks for listening. Welcome to Story Adventures with Miss.
And so again, this was a bit of a storybook version, but historically, the historical roots of the candy cane are actually very similar to the story that you just saw. Its roots, again, are in Europe, apparently in Germany, 2-3 centuries, actually more. I believe it was the 1600s that a candy maker made the first candy cane. And the reason that he made it the way he did is basically the same as the story that was just read here about the candy maker, putting a hook in it to symbolize the shepherd's staff, obviously symbolizing Jesus as the good shepherd. And the red and white stripes he made, again, to symbolize, just as the story you just heard indicated, that the red stripe was to represent Jesus's sacrifice on the cross, and the white is to represent the purity that both he had and that he imputes to us who believe. And so again, when we see or have a candy cane, that's what it symbolizes. And of course, you can also take the candy cane, turn it the other way, upside down, and it's a J, and it represents Jesus, obviously. So again, there are very deep Christian roots, even in the candy cane that we have at Christmas. So let me just summarize real quickly. Even the most secular and cultural aspects, at least seemingly so, of our Christmas celebrations do have Christian roots. Just the name Christmas, you probably know that the word Christmas means Christ's Mass. The day that everyone celebrates Christmas is based on the birth of Jesus Christ. You know, even if we don't know that December 25th was that date, the holiday that the vast majority of America, at least, is going to celebrate is on December 25th, and that date was chosen in America to be the day that we would celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. It's not a winter festival or a solstice or anything. That date and the national holiday that we have is based on the birth of the Savior, of Jesus Christ. So even if, unfortunately, many Americans don't give it a second thought as to, what they're really celebrating or commemorating on December 25th, it is the birth of Jesus Christ. We don't know exactly what year he was born. It would seem the most likely year is 2 BCE, or commonly 2 BC, maybe 3, probably no earlier than that. And of course, as I said, the December 25th date is certainly not definitive. It is the earliest recorded date that we have, but obviously there are skeptics that don't believe that was the date. And in fact, there is a whole branch of Christianity, the Eastern Orthodox, that point at January 6th. But even though there is shade thrown on those dates because some say, well, it couldn't have been in winter, the fact is that it could have been. We don't know that it was, but we don't really know that it wasn't. Saint Nicholas was a real person, and obviously he has evolved, or this figure has evolved quite a bit to now be represented by the American and the Western Santa Claus. But there really was a Saint Nicholas who was a very benevolent gift giver, kind of the secret Santa. He was a secret Santa, basically. The Christmas tree has very deep roots as well. Again, no pun intended. Again, very European, Germanic, and probably pagan in its origins. However, it's the tradition of the Christmas tree in this country has been around for a couple hundred years and has Christian symbolism. It has really been co-opted by Christian symbolism to mean rebirth and everlasting life in the evergreen. And then finally, we looked at the candy cane and the terrific symbolism that is evident and present in the candy cane in both its shape and its striping. So I hope this has been helpful, meaningful, and maybe will contribute to this Christmas being a little more deeper in terms of its meaning and what you actually think about, focus on, and celebrate. So Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.